So, welcome to Support from what is our show called? Support to Startup,
Support to
episode
Startup.
4.
Yes.
And this is a show where we talk about various things related to starting a business with a customer support background. And today we are talking about naming
Yes.
your company and business and product specifically.
Right. So should we do like a little one-liner intro of like who we are?
Yes.
Beginning of this episode. Right. So I'll go since I brought up the idea. So I'm Scott Trent, and I started and organize and run Support Driven.
Yeah, and I'm Martin Koeba. I'm the co-founder of Qualitista, a conversation review software.
Yeah. So let's dig into naming, right? So I think naming is the thing that I hear people get hung up about the most when it comes to like a new business idea or a new product idea. I think people get really attached to it, like, they feel the significance of it, right? And they want to like, they come up with a great name, right? And so, so let's talk about like some of the ways that we've named things, right? So like how did you get to Qualitista? And what are the things that you've done in the past as far as like naming?
Yeah. So maybe I'll sort of share the story of how we ended up with Qualitista. To sort of tell the story, I first need to tell the story of our previous venture that me and my co-founder Kair, we started. I think that was 2014, which, like, we've talked about this in a previous episode, but the first attempt at a software as a service type of business that me and my co-founder did together was an applicant tracking system by the name of JobKitten. And if like we really sort of like and have always liked MailChimp because like having like this sort of animal as a sort of mascot and in the name we thought was really cool for something that is sort of as serious as business software essentially. And then we came up with JobKitten, and we had a cat for the logo, and then like that business didn't really sort of take off because we had full-time jobs and we're focused on other things, which is something that we also talked about in the previous episode. But while we were thinking of Qualitista, the question came up that like we should sort of call it something. And at that point in time, we were sort of very convinced that like we shouldn't spend any time on this. Let's just sort of name it something. And the easiest way for us was to just sort of recycle. So we took JobKitten and called it Quality Kitten instead. And then we took the same cat and just put some glasses on it. So we ended up with a cat in a suit with glasses, and the company was called Quality Kitten. And
how long did you go with that name?
It's a good question. I think we went. What was the time when we changed? So I think we went for about like 6 months, maybe something like that. And Quality Kitten, like JobKitten, I don't know. Like somehow that's kind of like considered cute and sort of rolls off the tongue more or less. Whereas Quality Kitten, like we got some really negative feedback on that.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. I think when I hear JobKitten, I think of a kitten that's like delivering jobs to me, which sounds cute and like really cool. I don't know what a Quality Kitten would do for me.
you and everybody else.
Okay. And so you got this negative feedback, and then did you decide like this name's got to go, or?
Yeah. So I think we would still have it if we wouldn't have gotten sort of negative feedback, because it's kind of like imagine like you name your baby something, and And it's like whatever name you come up with, like the only sort of criteria probably should be like people shouldn't keep saying like your baby has a stupid name. So,
Right.
so like if it comes up several times, then you might have a problem. So like we also went back and forth on Quality Kitten,
Mhm.
but we settled on it. But at some point when we were sort of doing our sort of pitch, and like it kind of got in the way, people sort of
Okay.
pointed it out, and like
Mhm.
some sort of people closer to us,
Mhm.
like who sort of weren't worried about like what we think about the feedback, or like actually like we're thankful, I would say. They said like, hey, it's kind of a stupid name. So
He just gave it to you straight.
yeah, so we basically decided to change it before it wasn't too late. And
Okay.
6 months, like from the beginning of the
Mhm.
project definitely wasn't too late, because
Oh,
I don't think we had like actual paying customers at that point yet.
okay.
Or maybe we did, but only a few. But definitely it sort of wasn't like a mature stage yet.
And so how did you go? Like, how did you come up with Qualitista?
Yeah, so we I think it was like 24 or 48 hours of like when we sort of went from deciding like we have to change the name, but keeping the logo, because everybody loved the logo and we loved the logo.
Yeah.
And we kind of then started brainstorming. We wanted it to be descriptive, kind of somehow related to what we do, but at the same time we didn't want it to be, we didn't want to sort of constrain ourselves too much, because like maybe like in a year or two we will not be sort of exactly the same thing. So we wanted to give ourselves some wiggle room with it.
Right. Right.
So we had a uh, bunch of different names,
Mhm.
and many of them we didn't want because they were too specific.
Mm.
Uh, Most
Well,
of them, yeah.
did you remember of a name that you were considering that was too specific, or an example or
I,
something? Yeah.
I think like one of the names that was sort of on the short list was Support Sherlock.
Support Sherlock.
Yeah,
Okay.
like Sherlock Holmes, something
Right.
something. But we felt that like, that was like maybe not sort of, maybe it was like too close to Quality Kitten in the sense that it's like kind of like specific and weird. And Qualitista, on the other hand, sort of has the reference to the word quality, which we think like is and will be at the core of our product
Right.
and sort of identity. And sort of to me, like it has sort of connotation, or it sounds like the word barista, which means is related to like serving stuff and
Right.
like serving quality, something that kind of stuck. That, but after the name change, like the thing that I understand now is that it cannot, like many people mispronounce it, and we probably should look into registering Qualista as well, because that's the most common thing that sort of we see. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. I
One,
mean, I think.
the one thing that though is that we also tried really hard to get a .com,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
for various reasons we sort of believe that it's better to have one if you can
Yeah.
get one. So it
Yeah.
was a big factor as well, but
Well, let's
not the only
talk
one.
about that. Like, what are like what's the short list of the top reason, right, or the top two reasons that you feel like getting a .com is worth aiming for?
Yeah, so I think it can give you like a slight advantage in early days,
Mm.
when and I have sort of experienced this firsthand, where I sort of hear about something cool and I go there to the website, then it's not the .com, and it doesn't come up in the search results
Right.
right away. And so I'm thinking like maybe I misspelled it, but it's like that it's sort of gone. I don't. I think the .com makes it more convenient, and it sort of enables sort of these semi-random chances of like people hearing about you and going to your website. And if it's the barrier is slightly higher, it's like this and that app.com or this and that .io or .co, because .io and .co, like, well, they're sort of now sort of more commonplace.
Mhm.
Like, it's not something that you could guess really if you don't know for sure.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you have the name and nothing else, then you're more likely to put the name .com, right, and see where it goes.
So that's what, yeah, like one thing, but you know, I wouldn't say that it's like, if you don't get the .com, then like forget about it. Don't start your business. Like it's
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I think of it as a nice to have, right? Like if you've got a good name and you can't get the .com, because the thing that drives me nuts about trying to register domain names is that when they're held by like the squatters, right, where like, you know, they want to charge you like tens of thousands of dollars and they're doing nothing with the name, right?
yeah.
And you know, so if I if I had if I had a good name for an idea or product, right, and a squatter owns that, and I don't think, or I wouldn't feel that spending that $10,000, whatever they may be asking, right, would be the best.
In the beginning, absolutely not. No, like
Yeah.
maybe if you are sort of super sort of advanced and funded, then you can get that one as well. But like
Sure.
definitely not worth it in the beginning. Like that's the last thing you should be spending money on, I think.
Yeah, yeah, because I think the value of the name is in what you put into it, right? Like I think there's potentially some value in like just having a name that people can easily find, or people would just naturally show up because they're searching. You know, they're using those same like search terms,
Yeah.
right? Um, but
And also, like having something that's memorable, I think is valuable. So, for example, there's this story that I heard or maybe read somewhere about the French startup BlaBlaCar. So it's a ride-sharing startup, and apparently, the way that the founder came to BlaBlaCar, which is kind of like a little bit weird, but like definitely memorable, was
Mhm.
that he had a list of like 10 or 20 names which he handed out to people, and like then they gave no sort of specific instructions, got the sort of list back from them and asked like, what do you remember, which name of those like 10 or 20 do you remember? So it's like purely testing for memorability, and
Right,
like
right.
most people remembered BlaBlaCar, and that's I think a pretty sort of good reason for naming your startup BlaBlaCar versus, I don't know, like
Right.
uh,
Something clever.
generic, or yeah, clever or generic. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the thing I think I see most people get hung up on is trying to come up with a clever name
mhm.
and just and kind of feeling that a clever name is more valuable and therefore makes their product or their company more valuable, which especially in the beginning is not true at all. Right?
No,
Like you have to deliver the value, right? The name is not going to, do that for you.
I think it's like it's one of those things that in the beginning, often there's nothing else. Like that's your whole business venture is like, step one, come up with some name because you need to sort of have it to go further, and like then you can easily overthink it. It doesn't
Yeah.
really matter. Like you can blah blah
Right.
car. Like that's pretty sort of good example of like you can call your startup anything and still be super successful. Uh,
Yeah.
it's like in the end, like that will be like such a tiny fraction of like what will
Right.
determine your success that it's like almost insignificant. But I know you have a couple of good rules, like for
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, when I think of names, I think it's first and foremost, it's got to be easy to spell, right? Because if it's hard to spell, then good luck trying to get anybody to like share it.
Yeah.
You know, the secondary rule of that, or a related rule of that, is that it's easy to pronounce, right? And I think both of those are essentially kind of about like not choosing a bad name, right? Because I think with names, I'm much more concerned about like not choosing a bad name and coming with a decent name or an okay name, and then figuring out how do I make that valuable, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's easy to spend a ton of time, right, trying to come up with a clever name. Chances are it's too clever. Nobody gets it, or nobody would bother to try that hard to get it, right? So I think a good rule of thumb there is to look at how much time you're spending on it. You know, like, would you rather be building your product or your service, or coming up with names, right?
What was the first name you called your startup or company?
So I had started a company years ago, like over a long time ago, when I was doing contract programming, right? And I thought it would be clever to come up with a name that that didn't mean anything, right? That I could just, you know, kind of add value to, right? So I came up with Kiyose, right? Which um, probably most people would probably not spell right. But then I also found out that it was the name of a town in Japan, which I didn't know, right? And and it was, I mean, it just didn't make any sense, right? And and so I went from that to also to continue being clever and renaming that to applied constraints, right? Which was more spellable, um, definitely easier to pronounce, but also didn't really mean anything, right? Um, and so I had that name for a long time, and it was. I think I've only met one person who like heard that name and thought it was cool.
Hmm.
Everybody else was just like, whatever. And so I feel like I've learned some lessons about naming there, right? And so the first is like, don't choose a bad name. Don't spend a lot of time on it, right? Which I think is why it's great when, like, you know, when you have like software projects or movies, like they just come up with a working title, right? Like they kind of like don't get caught up in the name,
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
good
without,
point.
you know, just build it, just call it like it's a code name or whatever.
Hmm.
And then my third rule is that it should be clear about what it's about. You know, like there's no, for me, I feel like it's so much simpler to, if the name tells you what it's about, then for you to have to figure out what this name means, right? Which is one of the reasons that we stopped doing SupConf, which was a fun, clever name, right? But was not clear about what it was
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You could kind of figure it out if you like thought about it, but we've gone to much more straightforward names, um, you know, nowadays.
Yeah, I think support driven is great, and I think um, Pipedrive is also a great name. But Pipedrive wasn't the original name of Pipedrive. They had something. There was something like it was absolutely horrible. For the life of me, I cannot remember what it is right now.
It's so bad that you can't
Yeah,
remember.
it was like it wasn't spelled the way that you would like that every single person would expect it to be spelled, and
Yeah,
like didn't roll off the tongue. And so like they went from that to Pipedrive,
yeah,
and I think
yeah,
like support driven and Pipedrive I think are great names because like they're easy to pronounce. They sort of describe what the thing is. So I think Qualitista is only meets like one of those criteria that sort of describes what it is, but it's not easy to pronounce, and sort of people misspell it all the time.
right, right.
So
I
we focus on the cat.
I like. I mean, I think so interesting with the name, right? I think with the potential for misspelling, right? Because that extra that extra like TI in there, right? That's, I guess some people are
Yeah,
leaving out,
that's exactly right.
but I think it's good because it does connect back to what it does, right? So it's something quality related, right?
Yeah,
And you remember, it's almost like one of those like mnemonics, right? Where you kind of like qualitista, right? Like you remember one, it's easy to remember the other.
yeah. And I like, luckily, like after the first couple of tries, people do get it right. So
Yeah. So what are some of the tips that you have for somebody who is like, I've got this idea and now I need to give it a name?
yeah, I think the sort of example of BlaBlaCar is actually a good one. Like, if I were to name my company today, I would do the same. I would sort of
Hmm.
come up with a list and get some neutral input,
Hmm. Yeah.
because I remember when we were trying to come up with Qualitista, like at some point there's also like sort of decision fatigue, or if you're trying to come up with something and like no, no, so you will easily sort of get into like overthinking, and then potentially just sort of settling for something like super random that you would not have sort of picked when you were starting the process. So like I would probably sort of come up with a list, sort of
Hmm.
give it to some people, and chances are that if it's sort of, if the names are sort of varied and there are enough options, then there will be some sort of clear standouts that, and then that can give you like a sort of objective measure. But like the main thing is like don't focus on it because
Yeah. Yeah.
um, my sort of background is in communications and PR, and like for my thesis, I did this interview about like the rebranding of a couple of large companies in the region, and the consultant uh, who was involved in those, like she told me something that's stuck with me, and that was that the name is a vessel
Hmm.
which you sort of fill with meaning, which
Yeah.
means that like while it's important what it is absolutely secondary to like what you fill it with.
Right.
So I think your rules are actually pretty great for that. Like it's
Yeah.
like, don't give a bad name. That's all you need
Right.
to do.
Right
Yeah,
there. Right. Like I think one of the things that would break that rule is alternative spellings, because how how could anybody be expected to remember an alternative spelling? You know. Um, but oh, so the other thing. So one of the reasons that we kind of dropped Subconf as a name and as a thing was, um, we would get people asking or be confused about like who organized Subconf, right? Even though like even on the website, like we were trying to be very clear, even though like all the emails came from like supportdriven.com, people like just
yeah,
did
yeah,
not
yeah.
class, right?
So it was
Um,
kind of like an attempt at a sort of a sub brand
yeah,
of
yes,
Sportman. Yeah,
yes. And so that's kind of like, so that's why we dropped it and we renamed all of our events to include support driven in the name, because especially as a small organization, right, like we don't have the resources to be pushing like multiple brands, right? Like we just get everything behind support driven, right? Then that just makes a lot of sense. So like whatever one thing is doing, like we'd get name recognition for anything else that we're doing.
yeah. No, that's definitely sort of I think a good idea, because overall, like people, they remember very little about you. So if
Right.
you sort of start confusing them, like you can sort of afford it if you are, you know, Salesforce, or I don't know,
Right.
something sort of
And
huge.
if you're willing to spend a ton of money, right, to remind them in other ways.
Yeah, and like there's there are so many sort of instances of where you sort of are reminded of
Mhm.
them, then that's maybe something that you can do. But like if you are like somebody that is sort of somebody smaller that's sort of fighting for that attention, then like you shouldn't
Mhm.
really
Well,
squander it, I guess.
exactly. Like, it's about how, where do you want to put your energy,
Yeah,
right? Um, yeah, And yeah, so I think those are some good tips for people out there, looking to get started.
Although I just
Right.
remembered that I'm kind of like absolutely sort of not walking the walk, because we have another product called Training Wheels, which doesn't have Qualitista in it.
Has no connection.
Has the cat. It's got and in this case, got the sort of same cat plus glasses plus a hat.
Oh,
So
okay. The cat with the hat.
the cat actually sort of remains constant, but like the name,
Right.
like
Yeah. But that ends up being its own brand, right? Like,
no, I
and
think there are. I mean, like there are probably sort of logos that are much more recognizable than the name itself. Like, so I guess
right, right.
not maybe consciously, but I guess that's the direction that we're going with the cat.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and that's something that we should talk about next time. Is just the cat logos, right? So logos is another area where people get caught up on, and just in branding in general. So like let's save that for our next
Yeah.
conversation.
All
All right.
right. That's it with episode 4.